Are so excited to have these two people with us this evening, major fans. So have had the opportunity to chat with them a bit. And I think we're going to have an amazing evening. It's going to look a little different tonight. It's not your typical presentation. Like Stacy said, we're doing an overview and it's more about the conversation and the Q&A. And I think you're going to be thrilled when you see the two of them together and how Dr. Reichert and Dr. Demore interact with one another. So let's get started. As many of you know, Dr. Lisa Mort is the author of 2 New York Times bestselling books, Untangled, Guiding Teenage Girls Through the 7 Transitions into Adulthood and Under Pressure, Confronting the Epidemic of Stress and Anxiety in Girls. She writes the monthly adolescence column for the New York Times, co-hosts the Ask Lisa podcast, appears as a regular contributor to CBS News, works in collaboration with UNICEF, and serves on the advisory board for Parents Magazine. She maintains a private practice and consults and speaks internationally. So, lots of free time to hang out with us this evening. Dr. Michael Reichert is a psychologist who has worked in a variety of clinical, school, community, and research contexts over the course of his career. He serves as executive director of the Center for the Study of Boys and Girls' Lives, a research collaborative at the University of Pennsylvania, and is supervising psychologist at the Haverford School outside Philadelphia. In clinical practice outside Philadelphia, he has long specialized in work with boys, men, and their families. His writing has been published in The Atlantic, New York Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, Time, Fatherly, Good Men Projects, to name just a couple of them. And his books include Reaching Boys, Teaching Boys, Lessons About What Works and Why, I Can Learn From You, Boys as Relational Learners, and one of my favorites, How to Raise a Boy, The Power of Connection to Build Good Men. So Michael, Lisa, welcome, and we look forward to being with you tonight.
Thank you. That's lovely.
Yeah, thank you, Judy. Thank you, Stacy. Welcome, everybody. Nice to see you all.
Absolutely. So we had talked through a plan where Michael and I would each think together out loud about what we're thinking about parenting, sort of big, broad themes, and then turn it over to you for questions. And Michael does so much work on boys. I do a lot of work on girls. So we may take them sort of from the girl side and the boy side. We'll sort of see how things unfold together. But we're thrilled to be with you. And Michael and I know each other and are good, friendly colleagues. So it's fun to be here together with you tonight. We agreed I'd start. Now, the thing you also need to know is my mother grew up in Darien. So I used to spend a big chunk of my summer with my grandmother in Darien and back and forth between New Canaan and Darien because we had friends over there. And the big adventure at the end of each summer was the trip to the Darien sports shop to get clothes for school. And I look back and feel very fortunate that I was very preppy through the early 80s because things could really go way off course from the fashion perspective in the early 80s, and preppy was a fairly safe place to hang out. So I always think about that when I think about Darien and New Canaan and how I went to school as a middle schooler. So, okay, thinking about parenting and thinking big and broad, because one of our aims is to not talk about the pandemic and the pandemic only. We are all very tired of the pandemic. And yes, it influences our parenting. Yes, it's been an enormous challenge to us. But what are the big themes? And how can we then use them all the time and maybe even now too? So in thinking through some opening remarks, I'm going to start with the most fundamental, sturdiest finding in all of psychology about what kids need. And what I mean by that is if we took the hundreds of thousands of research papers that have been written about child development and parenting and the influence we have on our kids, and I'm the mother of a 17-year-old and a 10-year-old daughter, 2 girls, so I am also parenting right now, parenting in a pandemic right now, trying to have kids go through school in a pandemic right now, so I'm very much in this as a mom. So if we take all of those research papers and if we were to put them into a giant machine and ask them to drop out, like what are the major findings about what we should be doing at home that has a positive long-term impact on our children, 2 things would drop out of that. The kids need 2 things. They need warmth from us and they need structure. And so if we're going to start with the big stuff, that's the big stuff. And by warmth, they need to feel that we like them. So usually we do like our kids. Probably not every minute of every day, depending on how they're acting, but the general sense that is really important for how family life goes well is for your kids to feel like you enjoy them and their company, and you're warm and playful and appreciative of them, and that's something we really want to try to always be communicating. And then the second is structure, which is basically that family life is predictable. And I actually prefer the word predictable to the word consistent. Because to me, the word consistent can feel a little bit of a taskmaster. Like there's got to be like the rules, and they're the same rules 24/7, and everybody enacts the same rules in the same way all the time. Both parents, that there's no deviation. That's what consistency, I think, sometimes seems to suggest. I actually think kids don't need that level of routinization in life. They need to know what's going to happen. They need to be able to read their environment and be predictable. So by that, I mean, my daughters know I'm a lot of fun in the morning. I'm like a great morning parent. Like I start the day in a really good mood. I am full of hope that everything I intend to get done in the day is going to get done. I'm funny, I'm playful, I'm like, inventive. I love taking time making breakfast. I love sitting there and talking to my 10-year-old while she eats breakfast. Okay. By 6 or 7 p.m., I'm not nearly so fun. Because invariably what's happened by 6 or 7 p.m. is I've had this really ambitious to-do list for the day. And of course, I've never accomplished everything I have to accomplish. And I'm kind of cranky and I'm kind of tired. Now, the good news is, as it happens, my husband's a much better afternoon, evening parent. So I am predictable. My daughters know that if they want to have fun with me or ask me for something special, the morning is a great time. They may get a very different answer at 7:30 than they in the evening than they might get at 7:30 in the morning. So I am that consistent over the course of the day. I am entirely predictable. And I think that that's what kids need. They just need to know how things are going to go down. So both in broad scale, like how do we usually spend the weekend as a family? What are the kinds of things that usually make mom or dad really upset? What are the kind of jokes they think are funny? And that broad scale predictability is really, really comforting to kids. So when we go with those two big ideas, warmth and structure, the way I think about it is I'm going for a B average over a week on both. So that means that occasionally you can be cranky with your kids. And occasionally you can be less than predictable. Say you're going to do something and then mess it up and say, I'm sorry, I forgot, or I should have not promised that, I couldn't deliver on that. So you don't have to be a ball of sunshine all the time. And you don't have to be robotic in your delivery of a predictable universe for your kids. You want to sort of aim for that and have that be the guiding principles of things. But kids are wildly resilient and can do really everything they need to do developmentally if we're hitting a B, even a B minus average on this. Okay, so those are two big things. The other things I wanted to talk about, and this gets us a little closer to thinking about life in the pandemic, but these are ideas that actually I was having long before the pandemic, and I think we should sort of continue to think them through after the pandemic. I think we came in, actually not I think, I feel very strongly that we came into the pandemic with a misunderstanding about mental health for everybody, not just kids. And the misunderstanding I think that we have had, without maybe even being altogether conscious that our culture moved in this direction, is that there's been this belief that mental health means that you feel calm and relaxed and good, that you are mentally healthy. When you feel that way, your kids are mentally healthy when they feel calm and relaxed and good. So this was, I think, a very distorted view of mental health that we had arrived at over the last 5 to 10 years. I have a whole soapbox about the wellness industry. I'm all for wellness. I have questions about the monetization of wellness and the selling of the idea that the wonderful, nirvana out there for you is that everybody's going to feel calm, relaxed, and happy. And if you don't, something's wrong. I don't agree with that. But what I am hoping is that the pandemic might help us to reset this definition. And I will tell you exactly the definition I would rather we have. And I think Michael will agree. Like, this is the definition we have always operated with in psychology, whether or not we've done a good job of publicizing it. So here's what mental health really is. This is for you and your kids. Mental health is when you have the right feeling at the right time and the capacity to weather it. That's it. So right feeling at the right time is if your kids are feeling anxious right now, stressed right now, low motivation right now, frustrated with the pandemic right now, that is evidence probably of their abundant mental health. They're having the right feeling at the right time. So the fact of them of having sort of negative feelings right now is not the least bit problematic. It's expectable. So then the question becomes, are they able to weather it effectively? What do they do with the negative feeling? Are they picking on their sister? Or are they saying, I need to get outside and go for a run? That's really where this comes down. What is the coping choice made with regard to the uncomfortable feeling? So the negative feelings in difficult situations are a done deal. The question becomes, is there healthy coping happening? So, which leads us to the last thing I'm going to say to get us started here, coping. So as we are coming up, I cannot believe we're going to say this, on a year in this pandemic, and the goalposts are moving more than we wish they were about when this thing is ending, it all comes down to coping. This stinks. We are all struggling with this. The question becomes, are we coping in negative or positive ways? So negative coping is coping that helps us feel better, and it works really well in the short term and terribly in the long term. So this is stuff like drinking or getting high or being cranky with people or cutting them off or only eating comfort foods or not getting off the couch or taking your phone to bed and scrolling instead of sleeping. That's all negative coping. Or are we using positive coping? And the we here is us and also our kids. So positive coping, happy distractions, finding things with meaning and purpose to keep us busy, spending time with the people who really make us feel good and making a point of working to help others feel good, taking incredibly good care of ourselves, sleeping a lot, eating well, being active. That's all positive coping. So when I think about how we're going to come through this pandemic and what it means for parenting, if we could come out of this saying, look, negative feelings, they happen, especially if you're stuck in a year-long pandemic. It's all about how you choose to cope. Let's get us onto the positive coping path. That would be a fantastic outcome. Okay, so how do you get your kids onto the positive coping path? So my favorite rule in parenting actually comes, I read it inside a Dove chocolate wrapper. And the rule is, don't talk about it, be about it. So if you want your kid to do positive coping, you have to be doing positive coping. You can't get to the end of your long day and be like, where's the wine? Right? Or you wait till they're in the other room to say it. You need to get to the end of your long day and say, I have had it. Who's going to take a lap outside with me? I need to go outside. I need to walk. So as we think about big ideas that are both very much in play right now and also will extend well beyond the pandemic, warmth, structure, an accurate definition of what mental health really is, and remembering that our kids are watching our coping and they learn about coping from us. So I'll turn it over to Michael, and then I can't wait for your questions.
That's great, Lisa. Warmth and structure. I think we'll see lots of intersections between your thoughts about child development and what's important in a child coming up strong and healthy, and what I'm about to say. But I have to issue two disclaimers first. Lisa was actually being kind. I know almost nothing about girls, and I make no bones about it. I finally, 1 month and 2 weeks ago, had a new granddaughter enter my life, and it just strikes me how, having had 2 sons, coming from a family with 5 boys and 1 girl, how little I know about girls close up. So I'm all ears when Lisa and folks like Lisa talk. I know I've got a steep learning curve. And I think it's because, the second disclaimer, I think it's because I've been so focused on boys that I think about the larger structures that influence boys' lives and boys' development, the structures beyond our families, and the structures of ideas, we call them cultural norms, that influence how we conceive of who boys are and how those norms actually infiltrate into not just our parenting, but our own hearts and perceptions. And I want to talk a little bit about that. So I was at a boys' school. I've been there since 1987 outside of Philadelphia. And we created a program that ultimately we called the On Behalf of Boys Project. And it was an effort to double down on what we know from research in education and child development about healthy boys. And the program just happened to hit the right historical moment, and it got taken up with a lot of interest in the culture about, how do we raise a good boy, a good man? And we broadened the scope of what we were doing, the program, and ultimately became this Center for the Study of Boys and Girls' Lives, and we partnered with Penn. But because the program was one of the few, I think the first school-based research center focused on boys, we were asked to conduct a series of 3 global studies on boys' education. And we started with 18 schools, 1,500 boys aged 12 to 18, and 1,000 of their teachers. And we asked one simple question: what's working in education? Because as you may know, in boys' education, there was a quote unquote crisis. Partly the crisis was precipitated by the fact that girls were, finally being given full access to education, and they were taking off, and their lives were taking off. And what it revealed was that boys' achievement was rather stagnant. And that groups of boys routinely for generations had not done well in school, and we had kind of normalized that. But in a knowledge economy, that's more consequential. And I think, in the contrast with girls, we couldn't overlook that anymore. So we began asking, everywhere people began asking, what's up with boys? What about the boys? What do we need to do about boys' education? So we conducted this study online, focus groups, and so forth. And in the most interesting way, I was partnered with another person from connected to a school in Cleveland. Rick Hawley was the head of University School in Cleveland. And together, between us, we had maybe 50 years of experience in the trenches with boys. We were completely unprepared for the clarity with which boys answered that question, what was working. We, in our instructions, said, please don't name names or give away any details that might identify a teacher if you talk about him or her. And the boys just blew right past that instruction. And when they answered the question, what was working, what they said to us essentially was, what worked was a connection with the teacher. Where teachers answered the question, what worked, with technical detail about the educational theories they were following or the pedagogical, pace and sequence and so forth of their curriculum, boys talked about the personalities, the moods, the appearances, the humor, or the dour nature of their teachers. And they talked about it in abundant detail and rich emotion. And we were forced, Rick and I, we were forced to the conclusion that boys are relational learners. And we were forced to a second conclusion as well. Looking at the fact that we hadn't anticipated that, number one, and that in fact, the 1,000 teachers who answered the question, what was working, didn't mention the relationship. It was the boys themselves that pointed our attention to that. We had to face this obvious conclusion that something was keeping us from understanding the boys under our noses, in our classrooms and in our offices. We were laboring under a misunderstanding or a cloud, a fog of stereotype. And the impact of those stereotypes was profound. So 4 years ago, I had a grandson come into my life, and I had the privilege of being with him right at the, just moments after he was born. And I spent lots of time with him these last 4 years. One day a week, I go and pick him up at his school and I walk him home, and we have a quote unquote adventure, which means meandering home, taking forever, no matter what the weather. And my grandson, right off the get-go, what I noticed about my grandson was when I would hold him, he would look at me in my eyes, and his eyes were there was a depth of fathoming me, of taking me in, drinking me up, and that I almost felt like I had to stand my ground and let him absorb me. A little later, not much later, a little later, he began to burst into a smile when he would look at me. And I felt my heart being seized and captured. A little later still, when he would come to my house or I would go to his house, he would scamper, race, jump into my arms and give me a big hug. I felt myself completely taken. And what I had to realize in conjunction with this learning study where boys identified themselves as being relationally sensitive, so sensitive, in fact, that a connection with a teacher is a make or break feature of education, boys' education, I think education in general. We just didn't know that about boys. In the same way, my grandson was teaching me that from the very minutes of their birth, boys are in fact deeply relational. They have evolved as creatures, just as girls have, as people have, to be entirely relational. So we don't really know this about boys. I go around now, like Lisa does, and talk to a lot of schools, to a lot of teachers, and more teachers now than 10 years ago acknowledge that the relationship is key for engaging boys in learning, whether it's coaching them or teaching them. But in fact, it's still true that when push comes to shove, if a relationship goes south between a boy and a teacher or a coach and a teacher, suddenly the teacher forgets that the boy is relational and approaches it with a heavy hand of domination and discipline, because that's often how we view boys. We view them as somehow different than girls and requiring different things. We forget that they need our hearts and our warmth and the structure of a relationship that they can count on. And we instead believe that what we need to do is tame their feral natures, dominate them, threaten them, and make sure they don't get the upper hand. We play what I think of as a short game with boys. We don't want them to, get the upper hand. We don't want them to act out, forgetting that really what we're trying to do is a long game of cultivating their self-regulation, their moral judgment, and that the way we do that is in a relationship where their minds experience our understanding and our respect. The headmaster at University School that I mentioned earlier, Rick Hawley, he coined a motto for the school that I just have really, really held on to. The motto of the school is every boy known and loved. And I think that's true generally. I think that's when we will be able reliably to produce good men, when every boy has the experience of being known and loved. I'll stop there too.
All right, thank you both for those incredible overviews. And I love the intersection of the warmth and the structure. And I think, Michael, you broke down one of the myths about boys is that they don't need to be relational. And one of the things that I'd love you both to address is how as parents do we nurture that relational aspect in either a boy or a girl? And Michael, as you said, we don't refer to boys as relational, but is there a difference? And is there a different, at different ages and stages, do we need to approach that differently, especially if we haven't nurtured that when they're younger? And Lisa, if you'll kick us off on that one.
Sure. So kids want to have, our kids like us. Our kids like us. And certainly at least up through age 10, they really like us. And the nice thing about being a parent is that, you get through 0 to 5, which is basically bananas. and you survive it. And then you get to ages 6 through 10, which we call latency in the most technical side of the field. So basically 0 through 5 is bananas. 6 through 10 is latent. Things go quiet. And then adolescence begins at 11. Bananas again. But the gift of latency is that your 6 through 10-year-old thinks you're really fun and likes you and wants to go to the grocery store with you, if you know, and thinks your jokes are cute and like enjoys your company. Like they're built to like us at that age. And so if you want to be relational with a kiddo, right, the 0 to 5, like they're fun, but they're exhausting. 6 through 10 is so fun and easy. And if you want to really enjoy it, set your agenda to the side. And this is how we blow it with kids. And actually how we keep blowing it when they become teenagers is that we roll up with an agenda. Here I am. Now we're going to have fun on my terms. Or here I am, and I'm going to try to shape or change you in this way. And sometimes, of course, we have to actually do the hard work of parenting and correct kids or whatever. But I would say that the ideal way to stay connected to your kid is to be really, really thoughtful about when you are trying to advance an agenda, and to do it sparingly, to do it deliberately. But I think that usually that's what gets in the way. So 6 through 10, the way to think about it is they make it easy, they are fun, play, enjoy them. And then you think, okay, but does it all end? Like, is there like some like cliff you fall off at 10? No, 6 through 10, you're putting money in the relational bank. You are saying basically like, when we get along, it's a lot of fun. When you are a kiddo who's doing what you're supposed to be doing, I'm here to play. I'm here to enjoy you as a human. This actually sets you up for a lot more fun in adolescence. Because part of what people worry about with teenagers is that they're going to be naughty. Well, they are going to be naughty because that's their job. But part of what actually helps kids to be better behaved as adolescents is if it's a lot more fun to hang out with you if you're not mad at them. So cultivating that joyful, playful relationship with your kid, which is easy when they're little, and then continuing it through adolescence is not only more fun for you as a parent, it's also a really good disciplinary strategy with teenagers. And then the only time we blow it with teenagers is that we take adolescence personally. Teenagers have jobs to do that are important developmental jobs. This is what my book Untangled is all about. They got 7 jobs. They got to do those jobs. Doesn't always feel good as a parent, but it's really important to always remember that adolescence is a phase they are going through. It is not something they are doing to you. And if you can stay in that posture, like my kiddo's going through this phase, I get caught up in it in weird ways, as opposed to, why are you breaking up with me? What have I done wrong? It goes a lot better. But there are easy ways to stay in a relationship if you just size it up in a particular way. Michael, what do you think?
Again, Lisa, you've queued it up nicely. I'm gonna seize on 2 of those key words, I think, like us and agenda. I would go even further, folks, and I would say that kids not only like us, they desperately, vulnerably depend on us to like them back. You know, there's a 100-year-old key finding in psychology, a fellow named Charles Cooley, 1905, what's called the looking glass model of self-concept. And it basically goes, I am who I think others see me as. And what it means is, I look into your eyes, and what I see reflected in your eyes helps define me. It defines how I think about myself. For boys, the problem is that we begin really, really early to reflect back to them that being a boy has tremendous meaning for the person they need to be. A close colleague of mine, a psychologist at Stanford, Judy Chu, wrote a book called When Boys Become Boys. It was her doctoral dissertation, working with Carol Gilligan at Harvard. And she actually embedded herself with a small group of 4-year-old boys and followed them for 2 years, interviewed them, observed them, interviewed parents and teachers. And what she found was that they transitioned from age 4 to age 6. As she put it, they transitioned from being present in the relationship, being who they are, authentic, direct, articulate. They transitioned from being present to pretense by way of posturing. They learned that they were supposed to act a certain way as a boy, and they became less spontaneous, less authentic. They went behind a mask. How they dressed, how they talked, who they played with, everything changed in 2 years. They absorbed in that looking glass that they were seeing themselves reflected in a set of cultural cues. Another research project interviewed, online interview of 1,500 US 18 to 29-year-olds and asked, how many of you feel like you've gotten very clear messages about how to be as a man? And 3/4 said, yes, we did. Where did you get those messages from? 70% said our parents. We carry in our perceptions, our hearts, these biases, and we reflect them back just the way I think we educators did in the context of learning. We forget that our boys need us to be delighted in them, to greet them with a sense of real validation, not for how well they conform to our expectations for what it means to be a boy, but for who they are, independent of those cultural norms. And so I would say that, to Lisa's point about an agenda, I often ask audiences of parents, okay, so how many minutes did you spend today listening to your son? Actually listening to him, not schlepping him here or there, instructing him, correcting him, scolding him, shaming him, but actually listening to him reveal who he is to you. Because it's only in those kinds of conditions where our sons feel like they have an open space, the opportunity to really reveal whatever they might be thinking and feeling, that we're going to know them, and that they're going to come away feeling felt, feeling known by us. And that validation, that's the most important parenting agenda. I think, Lisa, I'm sure you agree with that.
Absolutely. And I love what you're saying. As you're talking, I'm thinking about something I've been hearing from kids in the pandemic about what they want from their parents. What they're saying is, I want you to hang out with me.
Yeah.
And I think the hanging out is no guarantee that I'm going to talk. I just want you to hang out. Like, I want to watch this show. The way it went down in our house not long ago is that the third installment of To All the Boys I've Loved Before came out, and our 17-year-old was like, come watch this with me. Okay. I thought my husband was going to just like pass out, but he did it. And, he had a hard time. But like, I will watch this kind of stuff all day long. And that, like, I just want you to hang out with me. Like, I want you to share in the things I'm interested in. Yep. And so one of the things I think about is we have to be careful, I think, as parents, about what the definition of connecting with our kids is. Because I think often it's our view is like, oh, I'm going to be present and I'm going to ask you questions and then you're going to tell me deep things, or I'm going to be present and I'll hold my tongue and then you'll tell me deep things, right? Like, we can have these aspirations of these like deep moments, which definitely happen. But I also think if you hang out with your kid and they feel like you watched my show with me and you just kind of had fun with it and appreciated it with me, that's a huge connection for a kid. That's a powerful moment for a kid. So I want us to know as parents, like, sometimes you get the deep, powerful connection and the moment and the meaning, and it's fantastic and you can see it for what it is. But don't think that that is the only definition of your kid feeling successfully connected to you. Sometimes it's watching a really dumb rom-com and appreciating how Instagrammably gorgeous it is, right? Like that's parenting.
Yeah. Lisa, one of the questions I hear a lot from audiences of parents is, well, gee, I would love to know my son and know what he's thinking and feeling. He never talks to me.
Yeah.
And I have a hard thing to say in response to that. And I'm applying it to myself as much as I'm saying it to parents of boys out there, maybe parents of girls. If your child is not talking with you, if your child is not taking the opportunity to avail himself, herself of your delight and attention, that's an outcome. It's an adaptation. And what you can do is you can take your cue from that and you can conclude, I need to double down on building the conditions that let my son feel freer to open up and talk about whatever he needs to. I think too much of the time, just as Lisa said, our kids feel like their job is to satisfy us, our curiosity, our need to know, our worry, our irritation, our ambition. And if we can actually communicate that, we're in this world to welcome them and delight in them and to marvel at what they reveal about themselves to us, that is what's the word? That is the secret sauce. There's no child that can do without that. And no matter how distant your child has become or hardened they may have become, how much they seem irritated by you all the time, you offer them that kind of warm, open-hearted attention, backed by your having located in your hearts how much you love them and delight in them. And it's going to be irresistible. What do you think, Lisa?
No, I think it's beautiful. I just think we forget the basics.
Yeah.
And I was thinking as you were talking about like kids not talking, and one of the real challenges is when your kid's upset and they're not talking. And we know our kids, and so we'll be like, what's going on? What's going on? And they won't give it up. And so my favorite thing about teenagers, I adore teenagers, but my favorite thing is if you ask them a straight question, they will give you a very straight answer. So one time I was with a pack of teenagers and I was like, you guys, that thing you do where you're super upset and your mom can tell and you ask her what's wrong and you won't tell her? And they go, mm-hmm. I'm like, well, what's the story then? And they're like, just 4 reasons. It's one of 4 reasons. And they said, okay, reason number 1, we know what you'll say. So I'm thinking about your outcomes, like what's led to the outcome. So reason number 1, we know what you'll say. So the reason I'm upset is I just bombed that math test. And it's the math test that 2 nights ago you were asking me if I'd studied enough for, and I told you I had, and clearly I hadn't. And so now if I tell you I bombed the test, I know what you're going to say and I don't want to hear it.
And they probably do know.
They probably do know. They really know.
Yeah.
Another reason is you'll blab. Like the thing that I'm telling you feels like a state secret to me. And I know you don't think it's a big deal, but I don't want you to call my aunt and tell her about this. So I'm not going to run the risk. I'm going to keep it to myself. Another reason, they feel like, because it's complicated. Okay, so the reason I'm upset today is at recess, I played with Jimmy and Jimmy was really mean and he made me upset. And the thing I already know is that you don't like Jimmy and you've been telling me to stay away from Jimmy. But here's the thing, like Jimmy's really fun and he has the best games and everybody's already playing with Jimmy. So if I tell you I was playing with Jimmy, then you're not, it's going to turn into a whole thing and you're going to give me a whole rundown about Jimmy, but you don't really understand, right? So something like that. And then the 4th reason, and it was a junior girl who said it. And I think junior girls are like the finest creatures on the planet. Like they're just like, and I have one right now and she's about to be a senior, but she'll still be fabulous. But like, I was like, you're going to meet junior girls when you went to high school. I was so excited. But so this junior girl said, here's the thing. By the time I get home, I am 90% over whatever it is that made me upset. And rehashing the whole thing from my mom is not going to help me feel better. And I thought that was like, that's right. Like we can tell they're in pain, but that doesn't mean talking is necessarily the thing they need right then. Maybe they just need comfort or hang out or privacy or something like that. So I think about the outcomes thing, like what leads to the outcomes. And those are some of the things kids have told me.
Yeah, I love that list.
Do we have questions? Oops, I think I've frozen.
Yeah, you are a little bit. Okay, I'm sitting back here because you're answering half the questions as you're just going on. So what are one of the biggest mistakes you made as a parent early on that the advice that you would want to pass on to your kids?
Yeah. How about if I take, I'll confess first, Lisa. So, my wife and I, we were so intent on being perfect parents in advance of our first son coming into our lives. We thought about everything, and right from right as we entered, his birth, everything went to hell. I mean, the birth went nothing like we'd expected. It seemed like everything was ruined. I was in despair. I was freaked out. And it just seemed to go from there for the remainder of his childhood. And, one of the things that we had thought, my wife is a counselor in schools, I'm a psychologist. We are students of child development. And we thought, we got to get it right. And we thought we could circle our wagons. We could create a protective barrier that would keep our son from being taken over by masculine norms that would harden him, that would tear him away from us, that would make him be afraid of being a mama's boy if he wanted to be with his mom, that would make him feel like a sissy if he broke down and cried, all these things that we were going to try to screen out. And we realized early, 3-4 years old, as we watched our son changing, that we couldn't create an impermeable barrier. We couldn't circle our wagons. We couldn't protect our sons. That the cultural norms that were going to operate on our son were ubiquitous. They were everywhere. We could not shield our son from those norms. Plan B, we realized, needed to be to strengthen our son's resistance and his ability to hold on to himself. And that the way that we could do that would be to build a really strong connection with us that validated him so that he experienced himself as known and loved in a relationship with us. And that would help him fight against those cultural norms that wanted to take him away from himself, wanted to seduce him into being disrespectful towards women when that's not who he was or what he thought. That he would fight against the depredations of pornography, in favor of a more organic, healthier sexual development, things like that. And so what we thought we would do, what we wound up doing, radically divergent.
Thanks, Michael. Lisa, what about you?
Parenting regrets. Okay, here we go. Mine's simpler, and I'm not proud, but it is what it is. With my first daughter, when she was a toddler, and I was getting frustrated with her, what I would find is I would appear patient. I would be like, come on, let's go. You know how toddlers are, like 2 and 3-year-olds, like really maddening sometimes. And then I would out of nowhere get angry, or at least to her, it was out of nowhere. Because I had been like, come on. And then finally I was like, that's it. And I would get upset. And she had no warning, because it looked like I was doing a good job of keeping my cool until I completely had lost my cool. And I regretted, in retrospect, I regret that. I felt that it was unfair, that she did not know how close I was to getting really upset because I wasn't keying her in. So with my second daughter, I did a better job. And what I would do when in that toddler phase, when they were being super annoying, or she was being super annoying, is I would start to say, I may sound patient, I'm actually getting pretty angry. And if I have to ask again, you're going to see it. Right. Okay. So I've never, I mean, there's angry and there's angry. Like I am well within control when I'm angry. You know, there's nothing, you know, terrifying or dangerous about my anger, but it is scary to kids when we get angry. And I actually am, obviously I'm not against the idea of getting angry with kids, right? I mean, kids can make us angry. I am very much of the mind that no one will think my daughters are as darling as I think they are, and they need to be able to operate in the world as it is. And if they're acting like absolute turkeys, they need to be prepared for people to not enjoy it and maybe even get mad at them. Like I am completely comfortable with that being a lesson at home. I do not feel good about the way it was a sneak attack in my first attempt at parenting a toddler, and I did feel better about the modifications I made in my second attempt at parenting a toddler.
Like, I think a lot of us can relate to that.
If you've had a 2-year-old or a 3-year-old, you certainly can, if we're being honest.
Yeah. So one of the other questions we've gotten is for parents that have both a boy and a girl, how do you balance, like, you know, there's the old adage, we raised all our kids in the same household with the same values and they came out the same. How much do you modify the way you parent when you've got a boy and a girl?
Michael, you go.
Well, you know, I think the basics are the same, but I think understanding the larger structures that are influencing girls and boys quite differently is an important part of our jobs as parents. You know, there's a famous child anthropologist, Barry Thorne, who talks about separate, you know, the separation between boys and girls, that it's so rigid and so complete for many children beginning in elementary school. You know, boys play with boys and they play boy games and they dress in boy clothes and so forth and so on. And that gendering of children, the imposition of gender norms onto a child as if those were natural and actually, you know, they were arising from within the child. That whole cultural process is something that I think both parents of girls and boys need to be aware of. For boys, I can speak about it for boys, it can be overwhelming. And there are moments when a boy is threatened with losing himself to those cultural norms, you know, surrendering key values, for example, or things that are important to him for the sake of being included in the playground group with the other boys. And I think that it's our job as parents to notice, understand the cultural context in which our children are operating as best we can. Although generationally, it's remarkably different. It's evolving rapidly. You know, a 2015 survey of California school children, 25% identified themselves as gender nonconforming. So these norms are really, really moving targets, but understanding how those norms are actually influencing our sons and our daughters, our children, I think is an important part of parenting. And you know, it's not that we have to parent them as a boy or parent them as a girl. I think connection, warmth, liking them, I think those basic tools are still the ones we're going to draw from. But understanding what forces are playing on our children, I think is where it's different. What would you say, Lisa, from your perspective?
Well, I'm actually thinking about something where we do parent boys and girls differently, I think often without knowing it. And I think we want to catch ourselves. And this is, again, right in line with what you're saying of like, it's coming to us through the culture. We're enacting the cultural norms. And I think there's some norms that we should be very careful with. And I would say it's around this particular thing I'm thinking of. It's around how we talk actually about physical romance between people. And I have a longstanding beef that I've written about a lot with what I call the offense-defense framework for talking with kids about romance.
Yeah.
And usually in this framework, the boys are on offense and the girls are on defense. And we prosecute this framework all around us without being conscious that we are. So the way we do it, we do things when we look at the research on the sex talk with girls and the sex talk with boys, The sex talk with girls is don't get pregnant, don't get an STD, don't get yourself in a bad position. Some parents say, I don't say, don't harm your reputation. You know, like we say all of these things. So it's like a whole laundry list of like don'ts. And often when we look at the research on the sex talk with boys, it's like, dude, if you're going to have sex, wear a condom. Like that's it. So it's basically to the girls like brakes, 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 brakes. And to the boys, it's like, we know you're going to ride the gas. So we're going to ask the girls to be sure they're in charge of the brakes. And we do this in a million different ways. We say to boys, we say to girls, don't send nudes. Don't send nude photos. Don't send nude photos. Very rarely are we saying to boys, don't you ever ask for a nude photo. So there's a million ways that this gets perpetuated in well-meaning, well-intentioned, birds and bees talks. So what I would say is this is a place where actually we want to have one talk. And I will tell you exactly what I think that talk should be. I may change my mind in a while, everything evolves in my thinking. But the talk is, okay, when it comes time for physical romance, everybody is going to follow the same 4 steps. The first step is think about what you would like to have happen. Okay, this is usually presumed for the boys. When I have said this I was with a pack of 9th grade girls and I said this, and one girl blurted out, she said, no adult has ever said that to me. That the first thing on her mind as she enters a physically romantic situation is, do I want this? What do I want? That should be the first thing. Okay, second thing, what does the person you're with want to have happen? Right? You got to find that out. So to find out what the person you're with wants to have happen, you probably should have decent communication with them. You should be able to talk about it. If you can't have that conversation, you should probably stop right there. Okay, third thing for everybody involved in this is, well, then what do we both want to have happen? Can we communicate together enough that we can come to a shared agreement about what would be fun for both of us? And then the last thing is, are there risks that could occur here, right? Could someone get pregnant? Could someone get an STD? Could someone think this means one thing, but it really means something else, right? I mean, are there ways that we actually need to manage the risks of becoming physically intimate? So what do I want? What does my partner want? What do we both want? How do we make sure this is a safe process? But if we could have that be the one talk, as opposed to the gas and the brakes talk, I think that would be a significant improvement in terms of the way we do parenting with boys and girls.
I love that, Lisa. And you've introduced a big topic, and we're not going to have time to too much with it. But I want to add a couple of things about boys' sexuality, because in this Me Too time, I know those of us who are raising sons have this very much on our minds. How do we make sure our sons navigate this period of our culture where there's a real spotlight being shown on male sexuality? And 2 things to say. The first is that every boy beginning about 11, 12 years old learns about sex first through viewing pornography. That's just how it is. And that's terribly unfortunate. And it may be possible for you to get ahead of that. But your son is going to be exposed to an industry that is dominant in how boys learn to imagine how they're supposed to behave in a sexual context. This notion of being the aggressor, being the one who's stepping on the gas, that doesn't spring from hormones. That actually is enculturated. And I think a big way right now it's being communicated is through pornography that has grown more exaggerated over the last decades than ever before. The second thing I want to say is research confirms that a boy is more likely to be respectful, have a fundamentally respectful attitude towards girls, so that he can do what Lisa is describing. Consider what his partner wants, consider what he really wants, not what he's supposed to do, how he's supposed to perform, but what he really wants. A boy is going to be better able to consider those things depending on the quality of his relationship with the opposite sex parent. I know that puts a lot on the moms, but what I would like to do is actually have you understand it a little differently. I would like you to take from that a profound validation for the importance of the quality of knowing you that your son depends on in order to hold on to fundamental values like respect and love. Lisa, you probably have 100 things to say about that.
I'm stuck on a funny memory. So my husband, who I married into a lovely Catholic family. My husband was raised very Catholic. We had 2 daughters. And one day I said to him, "What are you going to do if the girls ever ask you about sex?" And he said, without skipping a beat, he said, "I'm going to fake a stroke." So I just think, like, I think a lot of this falls on moms sometimes.
Amen.
Yeah, that's my husband.
Oh, well, we could sit here for hours. We have several questions coming in. So I want to finish up with one that I know is on the minds of many people here in Fairfield County. This is something we deal with every day. And the parent is asking, have you ever had to deal with, and I'm going to read this, achievement pressure with your own kids? And how do you balance wanting kids to do their best and not over-parenting around it?
Should I take a crack at this, given that I have a junior daughter in high school and this is my whole life right now?
Please.
Okay. Let me start with the research. When we are feeling the impulse to pressure our kids to do their best and achieve, I think it comes from a really well-meaning place of thinking we want to set them up for a good life. And the thing that we can do right now to set them up for a good life is to help them do well in high school, to help them get into the good college, and the good college will get them the good job or the good career. And when they have the good job or the good career, they will have a happy midlife. It is so well-meaning. That trajectory looks really logical when you imagine it. All we want is for our kids to get to middle age and be competent, happy adults. And we think the thing I can do right now is ask you how you did on that math test. Like, that's, I see these 2 things as connected. Okay, when we look at the data, there is almost no correlation between achievement and income and adult well-being. So what actually correlates with adult well-being? 3 things: having good relationships, doing work you find meaningful, and feeling competent at your work. So if you decide you're going to be a carpenter, feeling you're a decent carpenter, and then being in a good relationship or having good friends. Full stop. That's actually what's correlated with adult well-being. That's a lot harder in some ways to control. We don't feel like we have the data point we can work with today on that. But for me, as a mom, it really has helped me say to my kids, whatever you do as a grown-up, just make yourself useful. Just make sure you're a useful person. That's really been the target I have set for them. Okay, so of course then now, my 17-year-old daughter goes to a very competitive high school. She's a competitive kid. She's got her sights set on ambitious colleges. I feel I did not try to bring this about. I'm sure I did in ways I did not mean to. And yet there's a lot of achievement pressure going on in our house, whether I want it to or not. One thing that I have stumbled upon lately that helps is I do say to her, I truly don't care where you go to college. And like, I really can tell you in my heart, I truly do not I do say to her, we do want you to go to college. Like it's important for a lot of outcomes down the line for you to go to college. We do consider that a value in our home. Where you go to college, we truly don't care. We truly don't care. But I will also say to her, I think you care at this point. And so given what I know about college and what I know about how much you care, here's some information that might be helpful to you. And so that has helped to take some of the heat out of it feeling like it's coming down from me onto her. We had a question about this summer. This is her summer before her senior year, and whether she should go try to make up for the summer of camp she lost and work doing dishes at a camp in Colorado to try to be with her girlfriends who she wishes she had last summer with, or whether she should stay here and work on her painting. She's a very good painter, and do things that will actually set her up well for the college process in the fall. And I said to her, I do not care which of these you do. We need to be realistic about how it will set you up for applications in the fall, but it is entirely your choice. And I really meant it. And she said, I have worked this hard for this long. I'm going to stay here and I'm going to work on my painting and my other stuff. So that's where we are. Very personal, but that's where I'm living it. So I'm going to be honest.
You're in the thick of it.
Yeah.
Judy, this is a topic, boys underachievement, that I've written 2 books about. It's a big topic in my research, but it boils down to the thing I said earlier on. What we discovered was a necessary first base for a boy to be willing to be vulnerable and go to that edge where they don't know how to do something and learn that something from somebody else. That state of dependency, vulnerability, requires a trusted connection. Where boys have that kind of partnership, we call it a working alliance with a teacher or a coach, that can be transformative for him. And we heard in our research stories of boys that discovered, that they were poets, or that they could run faster than they ever imagined they could, because they were in a relationship with their teacher or coach that lifted them up to something beyond what they could imagine for themselves. Now, as a parent, we want our sons, our children, to have those kind of relationships with every teacher. And the question really is, what do we do when our son is not being inspired by a teacher or a coach, and he's underachieving? He's just putting in time, or worse, he's tanking. And I hear this question a lot. And I have to say, there are 2 things you can do: one about the situation, and one with respect to the boy directly. With respect to the situation, I think what the parent can do is act as a support for the teacher or the coach and an advocate for their relationship with the boy, rather than coming in and trying to rescue the boy and developing and deepening an antagonistic relationship, which won't work and is likely, in fact, to make things worse. What you can do is you can either encourage your son to go back to that teacher or that coach and get what they need. This was the gist of a talk I did with 120 adolescents last week at another school in New Jersey. I basically said, you need a good connection in order to thrive. Don't settle for less than that. Advocate for yourself. And we parents can play that role of encouraging our sons in that way. Many boys feel completely defeated. He doesn't like me. He's not a good teacher, whatnot. And I think what the parent can do is ally herself or himself with the teacher and see if it's not possible in that context to strengthen the relationship. With the boy himself, if we really see our sons underachieving in a kind of a willful, acting out way, I think that's a cry for intervention. And the kind of intervention I'm talking about is different than punishing, scolding, shaming, confining our sons. It's more about trying to help our sons get to the bottom of why they are self-destructing. What are they acting out? What's acting on them? And how can we help them become more aware of that and in better control of it? And there's a model for discipline that I describe in the book that Judy mentioned last, How to Raise a Boy, it's called Listen, Limit, Listen. And where the payoff is not the limit, it's what happens after the limit. I'll leave you with that tease.
And cannot recommend that book highly enough if you have boys. So as we wrap up tonight, what would be the one takeaway that you would like parents to leave with if they've heard nothing else tonight? And Michael, we'll start that with you.
Well, I would say this. You parents of boys, actively parent boys. I'm still parenting my adult sons. I'm also parenting a grandson, but those of us who are raising boys, there's never been a better time, I think, in all of human history. That's a very grandiose statement, but I really think it's true. I don't think there's ever been a better time where we're actually applying a rigorous lens of developmental science to boys' lives and saying, what can we do that produces better outcomes in education, in health, in sexual development, and so forth. So, you've got the times on your side, and I think it's become legitimate, both in boys' minds and in the world's minds, to be asking the question, if something's not going right, what's wrong in our basic assumptions here? What do we need to check? So that's what I would say. I think I'm very, very bullish on raising boys right now. And I give the women's movement and the decades of advocacy on the part, on behalf of girls, a lot of credit for why we're turning that same kind of rigor to how we're thinking about boys.
I'm going to actually end on the pandemic, because I think we've done a good job of steering clear of it, but I think there's these realities all around. So I know people are really worried about how this may impact our children, and I don't think those worries are ill-founded altogether, but I do think at the same time, we have worried about the resilience of kids, and I think we now have less reason to worry. Our kids have managed to learn and grow and find fun and do things and cope and enjoy us and develop skills living under a pandemic for a year. They have been so much more capable than I think we ever would have imagined if we had described this situation and then imagined how our kids would fare in it. And, I do, as we do get this glimmer, this sense that this might be over before too long, I have gotten stuck in my head this clinical intervention. I read it about probably 25 years ago. And it's so funny, what comes back to you and when. And it was a case book I was reading, and it was about a clinician who was caring for a Vietnam vet. And the Vietnam vet, she wanted him to do a group psychotherapy, and he was really uncomfortable about the idea of doing a group psychotherapy. And she said to him, I think this is the most gorgeous intervention. She said to him, look, you did 3 years in Nam. I think you can do 6 weeks in this group. Mm. And it was beautiful. And so what I've been thinking about a lot is our kids are getting through something so much harder than we could have ever in a million years imagined for them. And overwhelmingly, they're going to come out just fine from this. And also what they're going to come out with is a reset yardstick for what constitutes a crisis. And so what I hope you can take from this in your parenting is that next year when your kid's like, I can't stand sitting next to this kid in my class, or I can't stand this teacher, that without abusing it, you can say, you know what? You did a year in a pandemic, you can do 3 weeks next to that kid. And that this could be the benefit, I hate using that word, and it is the word, of having to endure this. Our kids are more capable and durable than they knew and we knew, and that is something they get to keep.
Great thought, Lisa.
Thank you.
Beautiful thought to end on. I hope everyone has been as delighted with this conversation as I have been. This has been an absolute treat. I apologize to those people who did send in questions that we did not get to. We could have literally gone for another couple of hours this evening. And we also already heard about Lisa's time limit on her evening with her kids. So we know we don't want to go stretch that too far. Thank you all for joining us tonight, and have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Bye, Lisa.
Bye. It was great to see you.